Hi, I'm Pete Chow. You may know me from the RTO Show podcast, but today I'm doing something a little bit different. APRO and Wow Brands have launched a special project to bring the story of our industry to life like never before. They've asked me to sit down with some of the true legends of rent-to-own, capturing their stories, their impact, and their vision for the future. And now I get to share those conversations with you straight from the legends themselves. All of this leads to something groundbreaking, though. A new book, The Rent-to-Own Revolution, A Definitive History of Advocacy and Consumer Access, written by APRO CEO Charles Smitherman and Wow Brands CEO Brian Krast. The book explores the grassroots of RTO, the advocacy that has defined it, and the future that we're building together. Here's where you come in. We're giving away free copies once the book is released. Just head over to the RTOrevolution.com and sign up for a chance to receive a copy in early 2026. Don't miss the chance to be among the first to hold this piece of RTO history. That's RTOrevolution.com. Check it out and become a part of RTO history. Hello, welcome to the RTO Show podcast. I'm your host, P. Shao, and guess what? We're working on the Legend series, and we have another legend with us today, Dan Fisher from Majik, all the way in Pennsylvania. Now, listen, there is so many things I learned from the Legend series, going from beginning to end, and some of the people that we've had on here, some of the people we're going to have on here. Dan is one of the greats, been a great help and a good friend of the show. We just want to tell you, Dan, we appreciate that. We appreciate you. And getting into this series, first off, Dan Fisher, tell us, how are you doing today? How's everything going?
I'm doing wonderfully today, and I have to say, Pete, I appreciate you as well. I think I was one of your earliest fans, and just really appreciate what you've done for the industry. And I'm just so glad to see you growing and developing and becoming really more integral for the industry. So just love seeing your success. So congratulations on that.
I appreciate that. In case anybody doesn't know, talk about a legend and a backstory. That was one of our very first interviews where we didn't even have the ability to record. We didn't have the radio. So we called Dan, and he's on his way to work, and he's giving us, the 411 and some of these things. We're writing it down. We're jotting it all down to have it in our next podcast. And we're talking, almost 3 years ago now. So it's crazy how I agree with you. We come along and we see things on a different avenue, in a different light, and the way they've prospered and come forward. And really, it's been a great ride. I know that somebody is now the president of is it president of APRO? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, president of the board.
That's
the board president. Yeah.
So you're kind of all over the place now. You're just making it happen everywhere.
Yeah. It's been a wild ride. I tell everyone, like, serving on the board of both APRO and Trib over the years. I've been on both, on and off, and both boards are just so helpful to me as a business person, where I love to give back to the industry, but the thing I've learned is you learn so much contributing to the board that it's been really helpful to me and my business, just learning from some of these legends that you talk about on the various boards, and just being up close and personal with them. You just learn so much about how you can improve your business. So I enjoy giving back, and anything I can do, I'm happy to help with.
There's a lot of tenure on the board. So when you're talking about the board, you're talking about people who have been there for years and years. You add that up, centuries worth of rent to own. Talking about people who have had legendary tales and the length of time in rent to own. When did you first get started in rent to own? Where did your tale start? About what time did you come onto the rent to own scene and start putting your mark on it?
Yeah, so when I was in high school, actually, 1984, my dad bought a very small video store. And when I say small, it was literally in a corner hotel room of a hotel, like a banquet room, and it was about the size of your typical living room with 400 movies in it. So that's what he bought. And then shortly after that, so back in those days, to rent a movie, most people had to also rent the VCR, the player that played the movies. And there was this, it was a really big hassle, because you're lugging this big, heavy VCR home to your house. You're trying to figure out how to hook it up to a TV, which back in those days was not always simple. There were different connectors and so on. And then you had it for a day or two, and then you'd lug it back and return it. And, my dad had the idea of, why don't we just let them keep the VCR? We'll get some in that are for sale, and let them keep it for $10 a week. And after a certain number of weeks, they'll own it. We have a customer, that's dedicated to us. And that was kind of the start of our rent to own program. I think that he had gotten the idea from, I believe there were Curtis Mathis dealers in our area at that time. We're talking way back then. And so that was how we started in rent to own as a, as part of our family business. And that business went well, but we just stuck to the VCRs for a couple of years until we had, the video business in those days was challenging. So we were in the business for a number of years. Blockbuster came to town and really challenged us, and we didn't really rise to the challenge in the video business. So we struggled. But what I realized was this VCR rental program was working pretty well. It's the one consistent source of income we had. There were no ups and downs. We could count on that steady, $10 a week from 20, 30 customers per store. And what was kind of the tipping point for us in terms of, hey, let's make this a business, was we had one of our very best customers who had rented a couple VCRs from us, and they came to us and said, I want a camcorder, which for those of you who are young might not know what that is, but that was like a video recorder back before your phone could do it for you. So you would, hold it on your shoulder, and you would videotape everything, and then you could watch it in your VCR. And these people were desperate for one, and we literally didn't have the $800 in the company to buy this for them. And we knew they were going to pay, but we just didn't have the money. And so, I said, well, I'm going to do this. And I had a credit card, and I went out and bought this camcorder for them. And then I rented to own this camcorder to them. And then, after that, I said, well, I'm going to make this my little business inside of our video business. And so we started renting TVs and stereos and all sorts of different types of items over the time. And then that just expanded and expanded until it became the primary business over a long time.
There's a couple questions I've come along with that. The first thing is, can you tell me how big one of the first VCRs were?
Yeah, I'm trying to compare it to something. So if you see my shoulder width, right? So I would have to carry it like this, and it was probably this high, so probably 8 inches high, probably 2.5 feet wide, and
Wow.
2 feet deep, and probably weighing 20 pounds plus or minus. Heavy.
We've come a long way to put something in the back of your
Yes,
pocket that can stream everything, right? So
exactly.
we start doing the VCRs. As big as they are, they're renting for $10 a week. You go into the camcorder side, you realize that there's a way to make this happen. As you're transitioning and making this very small rent-to-own store, what year was that?
I'm gonna guess it was around 91, 92. It was I was graduating college in 91. I think it was right around the same time, maybe even a little before that. It might have been 1990 when we were getting into that part of the business.
So you've got these two series. You've got, the VCRs. We're trying to get into camcorders. You open up this business. What were some of the next lines that you pulled in first that you thought, this is going to be a great idea. This is going to sell first?
Well, it was funny because my wife Trisha, who you've met, she was a customer of one of our video stores back then. Of course, I didn't know her back then. I didn't meet her until 12 years ago. But back then, she was a customer of one of our video stores. She lived down the road, and she said, it was so strange. I liked the video store. It was convenient. The people were very nice. But I would walk in, and around the walls were all these movies, and then in the middle of the store were washers and dryers and different things like that. So as far as what we got into next, it was laundry items, anything we could buy at Sam's Club, right? So there was a Sam's Club that opened in York, PA, and that's the equivalent of a Costco for those of you who don't have Sam's Club near you. And so we could buy, as a business member, we could go in there and buy wholesale cost on, I mean, wholesale is not that much less than retail, but washers and dryers, TVs, stereos. So that's the next types of things we got into.
So who was the first vendor back then? Because Costco, Sam's Club, they're kind of available to pretty much anybody who has a card. You have a small business, you can do that. What were some of the vendors that wouldn't normally be available to Costco or Sam's Club that you started off with first?
Our first, and the one thing that is I think a little bit interesting about our history is that we didn't know anything about APRO or Trib at that time. We had no knowledge of them, and so a number of years later, we discovered, and I don't know the year, but we've been a member of APRO for probably 25 years, give or take, and so when we finally discovered APRO, that's when we started really discovering the vendors, and we started learning the laws of rent to own, and we started learning the best practices in terms of margins. And so I was always so impressed how I would go to these shows. And even back then, people like Lynn Leach, and, he was one of the most prolific speakers at that time. And, Mike Tissot, I think, was already speaking at that time. And of course, you heard from Larry Carrico. And anyway, I learned so much from them. And I was just so impressed that this group of people who were competing with each other would share that type of information. But to get back to your question, I think that our very first vendor that wasn't accessible to the public was GE Appliances. And I can't remember how I got connected with them. I think I got connected with them before we were a member of APRO, and that may have been how we discovered APRO. But yeah, I think it was GE Appliances was the first one.
Did you ever really have a vendor at that point? Because we are talking already in the 90s. Usually, when I hear kickback on this question, it's usually from the 80s. But did you ever come across a vendor that was kind of like, I'm not really sure about the rent to own space, not really comfortable with selling that? Any obstacles that you had to overcome then as far as vendors were concerned?
Oh, we've encountered that through our entire life cycle, and it's hard to remember the specific ones from way back then, but even more recently, I mean, it was not that many years ago that we couldn't buy Bose. That was probably 5 or 6 years ago when Bose
Yep.
finally agreed to sell to us, and other vendors like that, because they just feel like they're, I guess I won't say too good for rent to that's the perception we got as a dealer, at least, is they felt like they didn't want to be in our stores, which I think most of them over time we've realized, and they've realized, that our customers want their product and can afford their product. They just need a payment plan for it.
What do you think, going back to those first days when you've got the walls lined up and everything in the center? What do you think that your unique approach to rent to own actually made it successful?
Honestly, I think it's the same thing that helps us succeed today. And I think it's just that family approach. In other words, our goal with doing this was never about maximizing every penny out of every piece of merchandise. In fact, that was one of our problems early on, is we didn't mark things up enough. So we really just didn't have a very good profit margin. But we always just wanted to help people get these things. I mean, back to that very first story about why we did the rent to own in the first place, it was to help people avoid having to lug VCRs home every weekend. And so since the very beginning, I think that's been the story of our business, is we want to help people, whatever we can do to help people, that's what we try to lean on.
So helping, making sure that you're serving the need that they have.
Exactly.
What was probably, I mean, because every time that we talk to a legend, we know that there is a success. You're here. There's been plenty of years in between here and there, and some trials, some tribulations that really kind of helped you get here. But so far, we're saying, let's say late 80s, early 90s. So, almost 30 years. What was the time in rent to own where you said, you know what? This is a difficult time. This is not like normal. We're definitely hitting some difficult area, and this is turbulence on this ride.
Yeah, we went through many phases of that. I mean, there's definitely been ups and downs throughout the entire, 40 plus years now. And a couple of those for us, well, a high point was when we finally decided we could open a rent to own only store. So it took us a long time to figure that out, that, hey, we can open a rent to own store. And that was a huge high point for us when we opened our very first non-video store that featured rent to own. And it was a big risk, but we took that leap. It was a 10,000 square foot store in a pretty prominent shopping center, so we were paying a lot of rent for that time, and it went very well, better than our expectations. But then, you go through phases where, as you do in today's world, where we got to the point very early on where we had 4 stores, and that doesn't sound like much in today's world, but 4 stores was a tipping point for us that really caused us problems. We had 3 stores, and I was kind of the what you would call the DM at that point, and they were 3 high volume stores, and I think I did a pretty good job. I had never been trained. I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't have any leadership training or any leadership knowledge even. And so I muddled through kind of being a DM of those 3 stores. And then when we opened the 4th store, it was in a tougher market. And that was one of our biggest struggles. Our very first manager we put in that store, who was our strongest manager in the company, he came from our best store. He went to open this new store, and he literally had like a nervous breakdown and had to be
Wow.
pulled out because it was such a different market, different than he was used to. It took us a number of years to figure that out. So, I mean, that was a huge tipping point. Opening in a very tough market, one we hadn't, been in a similar market before, and then simultaneously just, I think, exceeding my capacity at that point because, again, I just didn't know what I was doing at that point. That was a huge one. And then, we've gone through similar things where we were at 4 stores for quite a while, and then we kinda came to a decision. We either need to grow or we need to figure out how to make these stores better and better, and we felt like whenever we opened stores, it gave us energy and a renewed kind of life, and so we went from, 4 to 8 stores in about 2 years, and then we bought 5 stores right after that, and this is in the early 2010s, like, it was around 2013, and so we went from 4 to 13 stores in about 2 years, and that was a huge, challenge, just
Huge
again,
jump.
a as you can imagine, yeah, trying to figure out how to lead, how to now start supervising DMs when I didn't even really know what I was doing as a DM, and so teaching all that was challenging, and that's kind of when we got to the point in about 2017. So a few years later is when we really dug into leadership and leadership training and development, and we realized we needed to get back to the family roots that made us who we were, and that's kind of what led to that cultural, what we call our magic cultural revolution, I guess you would say. But that's what led to that, is we wanted to get back to where we were when we were just a family-owned, business, and not so, where we didn't have, we just had the 3 or 4 stores, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
So coming to the other side of that coin, when was the time when you knew that you made it? That you like we're going to be here. We're solid. We're going to be here regardless of the fact we can have a bad week or a bad month, but this is what I'm going to do and magic is going to stay.
Honestly, I think it was when we had a leadership meeting, our very first leadership meeting that we had ever had, which says a lot, I guess, in January of 2017. And it was a very, very, very challenging time for me personally, for the company, for our leadership team, because we were just going through that huge growth cycle and having to churn a lot of employees from the company we bought. And when we had that first leadership offsite, it was a 2-day offsite, and we came away from that offsite meeting feeling really, really good. We felt like we have a lot to deal with, but we now have a plan to deal with it. So I think that's something that was really the turning point that said, all right, I know we got this now. And from there on out, I think we've, obviously have your ups and downs no matter what, but we've really gone in a good direction ever since then, because we've just stayed the course with that strategic planning and weekly follow-ups and just making sure we're following the plan.
So planning process is extremely important in this business, especially when you're trying to grow and do it successfully. Taking the idea of leadership and saying, we were able to give that and start doing that, whether we knew what we were doing or not, we started it and we started going down this path. That's very important to a store. Was there somebody or several people when you first started this out that were mentors to you? I know you've already mentioned that, at one point when you first came on APRO, Mike Tyson was talking and then Leach was talking, but was there anybody that really took you under the wing or was a mentorship to you or to Magic and helped you kind of really get from where you were in the beginning to where you are now?
There's no one particular person that kind of helped Magic move forward, but I would say that who helped me personally have the confidence to help Magic move forward is the way I would say it. And from the very first committee I served on in the industry, I vividly remember it was with Shannon Strunk and Gary Fairman and myself. And those two gentlemen, I was just this newbie in the industry, and I'm an extreme introvert by nature, and I was just, that first meeting we were in, I was just a mute almost, and but I must have said a few things that struck a chord with them, because both of them really took an interest in me, and Shannon in particular, just helped me not helped me get on the board, but encouraged me to run for the Trib board and then run for the APRO board, and actually in that reverse order. And so Shannon and Gary in particular, I look up to as early mentors, and more recently over the last, ever since I got to know them, probably 12 or 15 years ago. I'm not sure. Mike Tissett has just always been a guy who, I've never met a person more giving than him. But there's so many others. I mean, Lynn Leach, we don't have the personal connection that I have with some of the others, but he just always teaching, always sharing. And there's probably 20 more that I'm missing. Chris Boland, what a great leader he is and teacher. And especially for those people who have, 3 or 4 stores or whatever. I wish I had met Chris back when I had 3 stores. I would have stayed with 3 stores and just done what he did, which is make them huge stores and super profitable. And so there's so many people, but the earliest ones would have been Shannon and Gary for sure.
Yeah, both of them are also going to be on these podcasts, and I tell Gary all the time, every time that I talk to him, Gary, you have no idea how many people mention your name, and he always takes it as humble as a humble person can. He's not that type of person to be voluminous and he's just a very humble guy, but he always has some great things to say. He always is very genuine and very he has a mentorship mentality, whether he likes it or not. We just listen to what he has to say. And everybody that I've talked to has always mentioned Gary at some point in time. And it's always good to hear that, he's been able to help so many of us get to where we are. And, talking about helping us getting to where we are, you said early on that you didn't know much of what was going on with the rent to own scene until you had come on board APRO and you started meeting some of the talent and I want to say the personalities that came with APRO, because you've got some people. Mike is a personality in himself, Tis a personality. But like, when did you really start getting into the advocacy part? When did you start going, okay, you know what? APRO's here for more than just this. There's an advocacy part, and how can I participate?
Hey everyone, it's Pete Chow here from the RTO Show podcast, and I want to tell you about a company that's making a real difference in the rent-to-own space, Wow Brands. I've seen firsthand how they approach marketing. And let me tell you, it's not just about ads. Wow Brands builds complete digital ecosystems designed specifically for the rent-to-own industry. Their e-commerce and lead generation strategies are built to bring in qualified leads. And did I mention that they are actively working with the rent-to-own industry while also being members of APRO and TRIB? Listen, these folks are passionate problem solvers. They don't just slap something together. They design, build, and scale the kind of digital retail tools your business needs and your customers actually want. So if you're serious about growing, reach out to Wow Brands at wowbrands.com. I trust them, and I think you will too.
It took me a long time to finally go to my first legislative conference. And that's because I am an introvert and I feared going to a legislator's office and freezing up or saying the wrong thing or putting my foot in my mouth, which is what introverts do. And but I finally did it, and I was paired with someone. I can't remember that first time, but someone who had been to other meetings was paired up with me and went to my meetings with me. And as I tend to do, I was fine in that meeting when I'm one-on-one. I usually am a fairly decent communicator. And then just taking away the fact that even if I don't meet with the senator or the congressperson, that I'm meeting with the staff member who probably is driving decisions anyway, and really feeling heard and feeling like we do have a voice and that they do want to hear from us. That was very encouraging to me. And and again, the fact that most of the people I spoke to had really no real knowledge of our industry and how it works and the people we help. And if they had any knowledge, it was because maybe they rented from Rent-A-Center in college or something like that. But most of them didn't have any idea that we help people who maybe don't have money management skills that maybe they were taught as a child. And many of our customers just don't have that skill set, and we help them learn that. And just sharing that message was very encouraging to me. And I think I might have missed one of those legislative conferences since then, and we had a conflict for some reason, but it's been such a good experience getting involved in that. And I guess that's the answer to your question. It's just that the legislative conference, I would recommend it for anyone and everyone. And you've been there, so you know exactly what I'm talking about.
You know what? I remember the first year that I went, I didn't know what to expect. Like you, I was like, I've done a lot of things, but standing in front of somebody who's been on CNN and kind of helps write the laws for the country, that's where I caught a drawing point. I was a little worried, but I was able to go with a couple people that kind of really put me on my ear and said, Pete, you're overthinking this way too much. Like, if this is what you're passionate about, You're probably going to sit in front of somebody who has no idea what we're talking about. And you're informing them like a brand new customer. This is why we're so important. This is how we affect everybody. And I remember coming out of it going, I've got to do this again. I really do. Part of the way the show transitioned is I never thought that I would be doing this. I never thought that I would come down this road. At some point in time, I was very kind of like yourself. I'm like, I'm to myself. I'm just that kind of guy. And I remember early on when Danny was there, actually Amberly is the reason why I'm doing this. If you want to come all the way back full circle, she was pitching a commercial idea, and Danny was like, you know what, I'll do it. I was like, I don't know. And well, she pitched the idea, and I was like, I don't know. And then he said, well, I'll do it. And I was like, there's no way you're beating me. That's just not going to happen. And so lo and behold, she created this whole thing that happened later and later. And it's funny, but you know,
I
it's kind of
remember your buddy, your not buddies. It was Rent King, your
ranking.
Superman type commercials and all that stuff. Yeah, I think I saw every one of those. That was great. Yeah, great stuff.
We came full circle from that, and I got to say, it's the people that we interact with in our lives that have helped us get to where we are. And you always want to remember the mentors. You always want to remember the people that have helped you along the way. And one of those things was, Pete, you got to go to one of these advocacy things. I was talking to Charles about it, and then I had talked to a lot of other people about it. And you got to go to it, and it was so important. But I just started last year. This is my second year. 2024, 2023 was my first year. When did you first attend?
I think probably 15 years ago, and that sounds crazy because time flies, right? And so it doesn't seem that long ago, but yeah, it was probably 15, maybe more years ago.
Yeah.
It's been quite a while.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like, I can't believe that I'm actually getting ready for my next one next year. Like, I have to plan for it because of everything that's going on, especially because, thank goodness, the growth of the show and everything. So I've got to put it in the calendar already. But, talking about future, coming from the past that you've had, kind of growing an organic store from literally not even being a store to growing into this rental location, and kind of going above and beyond, not only opening your stores, but buying other stores and kind of bringing that all together. What is something that you would expect to say to, let's say, somebody in the future, somebody who's creating a brand now, somebody who's talking about opening a store or getting, because this can be a little bit different now than it was then. Back then, it was a little bit harder to understand rental. Now it's on a few more street corners. But what is something that you would say to somebody who's going down that road, that path that you've been on, and say, you know what? If there was anything that I wish I would have known back then, it was this.
Yeah, well, there's so much, but I'll start with a couple. Number one, I wish I had connected with the industry sooner. So inserting yourself into whatever industry you're involved in, but certainly in our industry, being a part of APRO, being a part of TRIP, sharing what you know, and then learning from others. Like, it's a give and take, right? And that's what's so cool about our industry is people are willing to share what succeeds, because I think everyone in this industry, or I should say most people in this industry, understand that a rising tide lifts all boats. And if we help every company in the industry serve our customers better, then our industry is perceived better. And so if we can just help everyone do that better, that helps us all. It helps expand our reach. And so we don't have to be cutthroat and keep our ideas a secret, because we want everyone to do better. And that just helps our customers love our industry even more than they already do. And it helps them spread the word, I would say. So that's one of them. And then, for me personally, learning learning about leadership, learning what it takes to be a good leader. I learned that way too late. So it's one of my passions in our company, and it's one of my passions within APRO and Trib, is sharing what I've learned over the years that I wish I had known 20 years earlier. So those
How,
two things are two of the keys, I would say. Yeah.
it's funny you say that, about the rising tide, because there have been times where rent own as a whole, as an industry and as an individual location, whether it be Magic, whether it be Wraps, whether it be Buddies, whatever the case is, we get this moniker from the media that, we're kind of a little cutthroat, and we're kind of doing things that probably normal businesses wouldn't do. What would you say to that right now, after all the experience and all the time that you spent growing and now going to the APRO and the trip sources, meeting at the mines, RTO world, and now being on the boards? What would you say to that?
Well, I think so much of what what we talk about at those meetings is all about how do we help our customers? How do we serve our customers better? And anyone who's critical of that, my messaging always is talk to our customers. Read our Google reviews. We have our company in particular, we have hundreds of and hundreds of Google reviews that are 5-star at every one of our stores, and they're sincere. That's why I say read them, come to our stores and talk to our customers because they love us. We have generational customers. There's not a lot of companies in this country or worldwide, I would say, that have 4 generations of customers where you have a grandmother, a daughter, grandchild, and so on. And we have many, many customers who have 3 generations. I saw someone posted on the Trip Connections, I think it was a 4 generation gap the other day. And I'm sure we have that at Magic. I'm not aware of specifics, but we have a number of customers that we dealt with way back when who now have their children and their grandchildren renting from us. And if we're, not taking care of them and we're not serving them and we're not providing them with the value that they feel like they're getting, they wouldn't come back. If we're quote unquote taking advantage of them, they wouldn't come back for the second rental item, much less have a whole house full of products from Magic and then encourage their children and their grandchildren to come to Magic to fill their houses with products too. So, I just encourage people to do more research and talk to the actual customers instead of listening to sources that may not have the full story.
When you say they came to Magic, they're from Magic, where did the Magic name come from?
Really out of thin air. So when we first started, like I said, we were in the video business and our name was Movies Galore. We did not invent that name. That was inherited from the company we bought it from. And and so we were Movies Galore for the longest time, and then we were Movies Galore and Rent to Own, I think. I forget how that was, but we had to come up with a name, and so we brainstormed. And at that time I think it was me and my dad and my mom who did all the brainstorming late at night, usually at a Denny's. And we were throwing around ideas, and I think my dad said, "What about Magic?" And I was like, "Oh, I love that, Magic Rent to Own." And then we decided to spell it in a quirky way just to make it quirky. So I kind of regret that a little bit because I can't tell you how many times people say, "Are you with Majak?" Or some other pronunciation. But yeah, it was just kind of pulled out of thin air. We were throwing around brainstorming ideas, and I'm pretty sure it was my dad that threw out the name Magic, and we all.
I like that idea. I like that story. You know, coming through those times as well, there was a time or two where there was some regulation that popped up, and it kind of almost put rent to own on a pause. Were you involved in that in any way? Did that affect you?
I was blissfully ignorant back then. That was before I had discovered APRO and Trib. And honestly, it's funny to say that because Pennsylvania was really a hot spot for the potential problems at that time. And I was just totally unaware. We didn't know. We just were kind of making it up as we went along at that time. And I think that was in the late 80s when that was happening, maybe the early 90s. And we hadn't really discovered APRO until about that time or a little after that. And it's one of the reasons that I would encourage everyone to discover the industry groups earlier because it could have been catastrophic for us if we had been, big enough to be investigated by anyone because they would have looked at our rental agreement and found it was completely lacking because we just made it up, and so on. So we were blissfully unaware, I guess is the way I would say it.
There was definitely, there was a misconception in the law, in the government about how we did what we did and the benefits outweighing what they would consider negatives and not understanding, you know, genuinely where we're coming from, how well we can help the consumer and the fact that they're not locked in any way, shape or form. How would you respond to some of those narratives nowadays? If you're going to, if you're going to, let's say, a legislator's office, and I know that you're the recluse, so I'm gonna, but in your words, you go into the office and you actually do have somebody who understands where it's going, at least a little bit, at least what they think, and they're in one of those, tackling states that are like, hey, you know what, you're in DC, I'm from this state, I don't like what's going on. What would you say to them, that somebody that has this negative moniker, this negative narrative toward rent to own?
Well, I think that the negative implicate or the negative perceptions come from a lack of correct information. And so again, I would educate them on the transaction and the laws that already govern the transaction, which the biggest misconception I hear is people that say we lock people into long-term agreements. And anyone who's ever worked in rent to own, and I think 99.9999% of our customers
Yeah.
whoever have listened to us when we explain the agreement, they understand completely that it's exactly the opposite, that a customer has complete flexibility. They are able to cancel their agreement at any time, and they don't owe us anything. You know, I think in Pennsylvania and most states, by law, we can't charge a pickup fee. When they say to us, "Hey, I don't want to rent this anymore," we'll go pick it up at their house. They don't owe us anything, and and then if they want to come back later, they can come back later. And most companies in rent to own offer what the term lifetime reinstatement, meaning that if someone rents something from us, let's say it's a 75-inch TV that because they wanted to watch football season and they pay 6 months on a TV, and then they're like, I can't really afford this anymore. They can come back a year later and they can pick up right where they left off with a similar TV, and we give them credit for every payment they made. I mean, what's a more flexible, consumer-friendly transaction than that? I would say there isn't one in existence. So the counter to that might be, yeah, but they pay a lot more for that. Well, they do pay more for that, but the thing that again is not really widely spread is the fact that during that time we cover all repairs. We offer free delivery and setup. If they don't like it anymore, we can pick it up and return it, and we have that lifetime reinstatement. So, yes, it's more for a TV than to go to Walmart and buy a TV, but you have a lot of flexibility and a lot of built-in services that Walmart isn't providing either. So, I enjoy those conversations because I think that 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 the options, I think, is the way I like to explain it the best is we're giving the consumer options, and if he or she doesn't like the options we have to offer, they can just stop renting from us and they can go anywhere else they want in
And it just keep
business.
on rolling and keep on rolling. I agree. With everything that you've been through and some of the things that you've seen, because you've been going to DC for a while. You've seen, the rising tides and the fall sometimes, whether it be in April, whether it be in Trib, whether it be in Magic. We've come out on the other end of this. I'd like to say that we've come out on the other end of it okay. We're doing all right. What about this industry and what about Magic would you like people to remember years from now?
I think it's that specifically. I'll start with Magic. I think what I would love people to remember about Magic is that we cared about people and we care about our employees. Our coworkers are what makes us who we are. And because we care about them and um, we demonstrate that daily to them, they take care of our customers. And so our customers, we have customers as with most companies that are in this business that bring us pizza, they bring us cookies, they bring, and not me, they don't bring me that, but they bring the people in the stores the people they deal with daily. So I go and eat the cookies sometimes. But no, I would love them to remember that our customers love us and our employees love us because we value them and we treat them with respect. We always talk about how we want our customers to feel when they come into Magic. We want them to feel the same way that a customer might feel when they walk into Nordstrom's if they're a multimillionaire, right? So we want our customers to feel that sense of respect and inclusion and we accept everyone and we want them to feel like they're a part of the Magic family, and that's what I would like for that. As far as the industry goes, I mean, I think that it's a very similar thing. I think industry wide, most companies in our industry, their goal is to help customers have options, help customers have products that they couldn't otherwise have, and provide them with the choices of how to pay for that and whether they want to own it or not. So I think it's a similar message industry wide.
Well, you always want to be remembered for the great things, regardless. There's some trials and tribulations along the way that happen, and sometimes it's just as well to get through those because you learn a lesson. There's something out of it that you take out of it that you can take with you for good, bad, or indifferent. You learn from it. You don't do it again, and you figure out a way to make it work for you. If I did this and it didn't work, now I try this and I'm going to stick to that because I know the other side of that coin is a bad part of the equation. You know, Part of what I always realize, and I don't know if it's like this in any other industry because I've never been in any other industry as long as I've been in rent home, but it's like there's always a constant evolving, whether it's slow, whether it's fast. There is a point where you can look at it and go, we are always trying to be better tomorrow than we are today. And today we are a little bit better than we were yesterday. Whether it be the point of sale system that really made a difference, whether it be the vendors that we finally able to, work with, whether it be some of the laws that we can finally outshine and say, hey, this is not correct. This is what we want to do. Putting the rent to own industry on a pedestal is not what I want to do, but it's like a reminder, like, hey, it's not what you think. Let me tell you about the great things that this happens. We pull millions of people. We help millions of families. We are not just one conglomerate, and I don't mean to say anything about any big companies, but we're not like Walmart or we're not like Target, where it's everybody and we kind of take over all the areas. It's about having this one community that works its best to help the people in the community that they're in. And Magic's in Pennsylvania, and we've got other ones in different states. And it's always a great thing to see them come together and really help each other and kind of move forward. Now, we're doing this Legends series as a way to get the information from people like yourself who've been doing this for years and years and years. How can we get the information from then to now? How do you want this book that we're putting together through April to be seen in the future?
Again, I would love it to tell the real story of rent to own. I think the history is part of it, of course. I'm always fascinated to hear the anecdotes from the early days, right? And we had our own early days, so we were kind of around in the early days, but as I said, we weren't really part of the industry per se. So I love hearing how some of the others got their start. And it's interesting to me how so many of them started in video, the same way we did.
There was. So how did something that I think when you were talking about it, I did miss. You said that you were in video and then you started doing rentals and you had agreements that were kind of like self-made. How did you get from those to actual literal rental agreements that were made up? How did you go from that transition to kind of sort of probably should have done it this way, but we did it because that's what we knew to, all right, we know this is solid. This is what we need to do.
It was definitely someone in the rental industry. I think it was probably Ed Wynn. He was the go-to guy for legal stuff back then. So I'm guessing I probably said, "Hey Ed, here's what we're using," and he said, "Yeah, don't use that anymore." And so when we discovered APRO, we definitely upgraded our rental agreements, and I'm pretty sure it was through.
What was your first POS system that you used?
We used one that we way back in the day. My dad hired someone to write a POS system for our video store, and then when it came time to add rental to that, I was a programmer. It's one of the things I loved to do when I was younger, so I modified that to account for the rent to own. And then when the year 2000 was coming along, I created a Windows version of it, which I thought was really good. Actually, we loved that system, but we really wanted to expand a lot more. And as we were moving into a situation when we had 13 stores, and I was still spending 20 hours a week improving our point of sale system and still trying to run a company with 13 stores, I kind of made the decision that I either had to choose to be a computer programmer or to run the business. So I chose to run the business. And so our first point of sale system, story short, was VersaRent. We were one of the early adopters of the Windows version of VersaRent when they first came out with that. But prior to that, it was all self-made, all self.
It sounds like you wore a lot of hats back then.
Oh my gosh, yeah, a lot of hats for sure, for sure.
So come all the way back. Now you're the president of APRO. You've been on multiple boards. You have Majik, which is always revered as probably one of the best cultured rent-to-own companies in the industry, which it's funny you say that you didn't know a lot about it, to being one of the ones that have probably one of the better cultures to say about, not just to speak about it as in it has a great culture, but you were actually, Majik was awarded one of the best places to work in Pennsylvania. Was it 2023 or 2024?
Actually, 3 years in a row now. Yeah,
3 years in a row. So it's still running.
We're hoping 4 years in a row. Yeah, we're just completing the surveys right now for that. So hopefully 4 years in a row.
I mean, that's great to see that it's come full circle, that you've been able to grow with the industry and the industry has kind of grown with you. There's a lot of leadership that, we've talked about here. And just so that I can put this on the record, Edwin is the number 2 person that everybody always mentions as helped me get to somewhere from this point. And he's been doing it for so long, and I know that he's out of it now. But I always say to everybody, if you call, I guarantee he's going to answer the call, because that's Ed Wynn. That's the guy he is. But Daniel, I really appreciate you being on the show. I really appreciate you taking out the time to just sit down with us and talk a little bit of shop, talk a little bit about what it was like kind of from the beginning and getting to where we are. And I will tell you guys, we always appreciate you guys watching the show, especially the Legend series, that you can learn just like I am as I'm sitting here kind of listening to Daniel and everybody else talk about how it was, how it used to be, the trials and tribulations, and how we ended up here being in this wonderful industry, always advocating for it in DC every year, or growing, or having the best culture in our state. That's exactly what we're here to do. Just have the best place and have the best people. And I want to tell you guys, I appreciate you all the time for listening in. If you have any questions, please email me, Pete@the RTOshowpodcast.com. You can ask me any questions about Daniel, like how the heck did he get the greatest culture, or how did he ever figure out APRO was alive? And I will pass that along. If anything happens, I promise you, I will answer you back. If you want to see us online, you can see us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and now YouTube, where you're going to see this. And I will tell you guys, as always, Daniel, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you being with us. Get your collections low to get your sales high. Have a great one.